Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to DreamWorks Switch to Life. And in today's video, we're going to be reviewing the latest Jurassic movie and the start of the brand new Jurassic era. That of course being Jurassic World Rebirth. Now, if you ask me, I walked out of the theater and thought this was the best Jurassic movie since the original Jurassic Park. But, you know, given some time, I realized I'm blinded by recency bias, and this movie, while still really good, is a bit lackluster in some departments. So first off, honestly, the cinematography and CGI was simply amazing, especially because unlike a lot of other films where they just use a green screen and CGI, they actually went out into the world and filmed on location at a bunch of really cool places. And the fact that they were using ancient filming equipment, like they actually filmed this movie on film, not just a digital camera, is really cool. And it brings back that feeling of classic cinema, which I'm pretty sure that's what the director Gareth Edwards was going for. And then of course there's the fact that the story is written by David Koepp, who actually wrote the first Jurassic Park and The Lost World. Unfortunately, I don't think he did that much of a good job in this movie, but we'll dive more into that later. As for the acting, well, I'm pretty sure the actors brought their A game. Scarlett Johansson, she was not only the cool action hero that we all know as Black Widow, but at the same time, she was really funny with her lines and definitely emotional with her backstory, which I really loved. And then, of course, there was Mahershala Ali, who was actually really cool as Duncan Kincaid. And then my personal favorite was Jonathan Bailey as his character, Dr. Henry Loomis. Not only because his character is so dark and morbid, but at the same time, really funny. I mean, just the way he delivers his lines is just super cool. And then, of course, there's also the other cast members, including the Delgado family. They did an amazing job portraying a normal family thrust into a world where they have to survive. I especially love Adriana as Isabel because she was actually really cool, especially considering that for most of this series, the kid actors, they're just screaming, sometimes being annoying by complaining. But what I love about Isabel is she's the kind of person who, when she's nervous, she shuts down. Sure, she's walking around following her family, but she's not really providing anything for the conversation. And then eventually she meets up with Dolores, who is a baby Aquilops, and Dolores actually helps her calm down and makes it so that she actually becomes a lot more active. And what I love is that while kid characters in previous Jurassic movies can come across as slightly annoying, but again, understandable, she comes across as a kid who's actually trying to be super helpful and contribute, which is more than I can say for another character, Xavier Dobbs, who is the boyfriend of Teresa Delgado. And before you guys say anything, yes, Xavier is kind of built as this character who you want to hate because he just is super lazy, but over the course of the movie, you actually get to see a different side of him, and he becomes this super cool, relatable character, and I really enjoyed that. And the final spotlight I want to point out is that Rupert Friend brings his A game playing the character Martin Krebs. We'll dive more into that later, but for now, let's dive into the music. Honestly, the music is kind of lacking. I hate to say this, but aside from the classic Jurassic music, there's not really any standout music in this movie, which is really disappointing. The Lost World did its own thing, Jurassic World did its own thing, but Rebirth, it's just not really there, if you know what I mean, and that's kind of disappointing. But with all of that out of the way, let's talk about the dinosaurs. What I really loved is that all of the dinosaurs in this movie, with the exception of Dolores, are CGI. Dolores is the only animatronic dinosaur, and because of that, it actually makes this movie a lot better when it comes to the way the dinosaurs move and interact with our characters. And of course, my personal favorite dinosaur is still Dolores. Even though she was played by an animatronic, she was actually very energetic and playful, and she moved an awful lot like a puppy, which I found to be really cute. And honestly, this movie is worth it just for seeing a baby dinosaur interact with a little girl. Now it's time for the story, but first off, no spoilers at this point. We will dive into spoilers later. The story is kind of simplistic, and the pacing felt a little bit off. What kind of felt like it was just moving back and forth between the Delgados and the mission team, which is a little disappointing. There's not really a lot of time to emotionally dive in with these characters. Sure, at the beginning, we get to hear a little bit of backstory, but if you're not paying attention, you'll completely miss anything that can be relatable to these characters. There's not really a moment of downtime where the characters can actually just have a moment to get some character development, with the exception of Xavier. He gets a bit of character development, but not much. Another thing that this lack of downtime does is make it so that the characters can't really dive into the lore of this movie. See, the thing is, on Isla Saint Hubert, there's some InGen genetic testing where they create mutant dinosaurs, but these mutant dinosaurs just appear out of nowhere, and they don't really dive into the origins, which they can definitely be trying to save for a sequel, because we all know it's Jurassic. This is literally going to be the start of a trilogy, mark my words. Even though Universal said that this was painted to be a solo movie, it's clearly the start of a new trilogy, and it will not surprise me if Universal hires Gareth Edwards to come back and help write and direct the sequel, which, for the record, he's actually stated that if that was the case, he would want it to focus on dinosaurs being on the mainland, which, again, is weird considering the setup for this movie, but here we are. As for the deaths, well, I really hate to say this, but they are few and somewhat forgettable, with the exception of the final death of the movie, which we won't really dive into. What I do love, however, is that while this movie does feel like an action movie at some points, it also feels like a horror survivalist movie, which I absolutely enjoyed, especially because there's a lot more gore in this movie than compared to any of the previous installments. And now, with all of that out of the way, it's time to dive into spoilers. So go and watch the movie and then come back. Or, you can just stick around if you don't really care. So first off, we see a flashback sequence that takes place 17 years in the past, most likely in the year 2010, where we go to the island Isle Saint Hubert, and we see an InGen facility trying to genetically alter some species and create mutants or hybrids. They create the Mutantodon, but of course the star of this prologue scene is the Distortus Rex. So the scientists go into the enclosure, and I really love that because they actually took a lot of security measures to make sure that the D-Rex did not escape. Unfortunately, there was one rogue Snickers wrapper causing a malfunction with the door, and so the scientists managed to escape, with the exception of one who ends up trapped inside with the D-Rex. And what I really love is that it's kind of like the T-Rex is toying with this scientist. You can see the genuine fear. He is trapped. He has absolutely no chance of escape. He is pleading with his fellow scientist to open the door, and then the D-Rex kills him, and not in a quick and painless way, in a way that fills him with fear, which I absolutely loved. Then we fast forward 17 years, or rather to the present day, which isn't actually the present day. So leading up to this movie, the marketing has been saying that Rebirth takes place 5 years after Jurassic World Dominion, which takes place in November 2022. Well, the thing is, most official sources are saying that Rebirth takes place in the year 2027. More specifically, the summer, since it's confirmed that the Delgados are on summer break, so that's why they're not in school. And I really hate to say this, but unfortunately, during that time, dinosaurs have kind of been dying off. In Jurassic World Dominion, they've been spread all across the globe. And well, 5 years later, it's now too cold for them to survive anywhere except for the equatorial line, which means that all humans are banished from the equator so that dinosaurs can live there in peace. And the reason, the world was just hotter during the Cretaceous period, and also the oxygen is a lot less polluted and it's not as thin. So that's the only place on Earth where dinosaurs can survive, which I really hate because Dominion painted that dinosaurs would be everywhere on the planet, and those who couldn't survive the cold would move to warmer climates. But there were dinosaurs who could because they were endothermic, meaning that they could create their own body heat. But I guess dinosaurs are now just reduced to living in zoos and the equator in Jurassic World Rebirth. Also, at the beginning of the movie, there's a line that says, "It's been 32 years since dinosaurs have been brought back." Well, the thing is, those 32 years are actually a reference to the release dates of the movies. See, from now, when Jurassic World Rebirth released, it's been 32 years since the release of the original Jurassic Park, which I think was really cool, but again, confusing that they decided to include it in the movie, because then it just makes most audiences think that since this is set in present day and not 2027, which is what every single official source has been saying, it just confuses audiences because dinosaurs didn't really make their return until the 1980s, you know, when the first Microceratus was brought back from extinction. Anyway, back to the story. We meet Zora Bennett, who is basically this government spy slash mercenary. They literally explained what she was, but I can't for the life of me recall what they said. Anyway, Martin Krebs recruits her and decides to pay her $10 million so that she will go to the equatorial line on a dinosaur-infested island and collect the DNA from the 3 largest dinosaurs from land, sea, and air. That, of course, being the Titanosaurus, the largest creature to ever walk the earth. The Mosasaurus, the largest aquatic dinosaur, even though most aquatic reptiles aren't actually dinosaurs. And the Quetzalcoatlus, which is also not a dinosaur, just a pterosaur. But I also want to mention that it's not as big as the one that was in Jurassic World Dominion, so there's that. And then we move on to a museum where there's a museum curator named Dr. Henry Loomis, who is actually in charge of making sure they get the right dinosaurs. And, well, he didn't know this, but apparently he's actually going to the island. Although, one thing I do love is that in this scene, he actually name drops that he used to work for Dr. Alan Grant, which I really loved. Then Zora reaches out to Duncan Kincaid and his crew so that, well, not only do they get better pay, but at the same time, they get a ride to the island of Isla Saint-Hubert. Now, you might be wondering why they're trying to get these dinosaur DNA, and the reason is because they need the DNA so that they can create a medical drug that will cure heart disease and save about 1/5 of the planet, which I found to be pretty cool. But if you really want to know, there's actually a bunch of Jurassic theories going around that this heart disease is actually the DX disease from the original Jurassic Park books by Michael Crichton. Anyway, our mission team is using a tracker that they got from Parkergenics, who actually bought the tracker from InGen so that they could track down the Mosasaurus in the middle of the ocean. And, well, while they're doing that, the Mosasaurus ends up attacking a normal boat which holds the Delgado family and nearly causes it to sink. And what I really love is that you can actually tell that these characters are in real danger, especially Xavier, who is trapped inside of the boat and is probably going to drown if he doesn't kick the door open. Let me back up for a minute, though. See, Xavier is super lazy because they were supposed to take turns at the wheel because the Delgados are trying to cross the ocean so that they can go on vacation. And the thing is that they were kind of having a sleep schedule where they swap around, but Xavier, he just decided to skip his shift because he's super lazy, and he went back to bed and decided to take a nap. And while the Mosasaurus attacks, he's trapped inside of the cabin, and luckily that's a good thing because it means that Xavier can actually go for the emergency hand radio, which the Delgados then use to call for help. Well, this message is intercepted by our mission team, and despite the fact that Martin Krebs says they're less than 3 miles away from the island and that somebody else can probably rescue them, Zora and Duncan agree agree to turn the boat around and they rescue the Delgados, which is actually a good thing because it turns out that the Mosasaurus they were tracking is actually near the Delgados. So they track the Mosasaurus, at which point they get the DNA sample using an invention by Dr. Henry Loomis. And it's a pretty intense scene, but they managed to get the DNA sample. Unfortunately, though, while they're heading to the island to get the rest, the Mosasaurus comes back with revenge, as well as some buddies, the Spinosauruses. And there's like an entire pack of Spinosauruses attacking. And, well, unfortunately, this is where we say goodbye to a lot of Duncan Kincaid's crew, who, being minor actors that didn't get a lot of advertising, it's very clear that they were just put in the movie to be cannon fodder. Their deaths were pretty cool because they were really gory, but they were also kind of forgettable. However, what I did love is the Delgado family in this instance, because Isabel, the kid, is about to go overboard when her dad dives in after her and catches her just before a Spinosaurus manages to eat her. But unfortunately, he hooks his leg around a machine to keep them in place, and because of their combined weight, his ankle actually twists, and that means that he can't really walk or run without some help. And that means that that's an injury that we're going to have to watch throughout the rest of the movie, and that's really cool. Especially because throughout the entire franchise, with the exception of Camp Cretaceous maybe, we've never actually seen any of the characters get an injury that could potentially get them killed. Again, an ankle twist, not really going to kill you on its own, but if you can't run away from dinosaurs, yeah, that's going to be a death sentence. Anyway, Ruben tells his daughter Teresa to get on the phone so they can call for help, and unfortunately, because this is an illegal mission, because they're going to a place where humans are forbidden, Martin Krebs tries to stop Teresa from making the call and ends up pushing her right into the edge of the boat, and well, she's going to fall into the water if he doesn't catch her, and even though that's very clear to him, he just stands there and watches her fall, all for the sake of letting the secret die with her. Well, this is actually where Xavier comes in. Despite the fact that he's portrayed as lazy, he jumps into the water and rescues his girlfriend, which I absolutely loved. And remember, these are dinosaur-infested waters. They're literally being attacked by Spinosaurus and Mosasaurus right now. And yet, he jumps in to rescue her, which I absolutely loved. And then, so that they don't get separated, Ruben and Isabel jump into the water after them. And that results in the Delgados being stranded from the mission team, splitting the movie into two parts. So, here's part one, the mission team. The mission ends up crash landing and Duncan has to say goodbye to his ship. At the same time, because of the crash land and Spinosaurus taking all their stuff, they have no weapons to protect themselves as they explore the dinosaur-infested island. All they do have, at least in terms of guns, is the DNA serum shooter, which is not really a weapon. But thankfully, Zora has a backup plan. In the event that their boat doesn't have a 24-hour broadcast and they go 24 hours without broadcasting, there's going to be a helicopter that will fly over the island, and if they see any humans on the island, they will land. If they don't, well, the helicopter will just fly over the island and leave them stranded once again. So our two teams have to make their way across the island to the InGen research facility, and while the Delgados can just follow the geothermal piping that powers the genetic facility, the mission team has to go a different route because they still need to collect the DNA from a Titanosaurus and Quetzalcoatlus. So they go through the jungle, and as they're walking, Martin Krebs discovers a crashed airplane with a pilot who has clearly been decomposed, but he's actually holding a gun. So, not telling any of the rest of the team, he grabs the gun, and then they continue on their way to a dinosaur-filled valley with super long grass, which, by the way, was actually grown specifically for this movie, which I absolutely loved. But anyway, they meet the Titanosaurus, and and there's a scene with wonder and awe, and for the first time ever, Dr. Henry Loomis finally gets his chance to touch a dinosaur. And what I really love is that we actually get to see two Titanosauruses in a mating ritual.
You don't see that every day. Whatever.
Well, Zora takes the shot and gets the DNA from the Titanosaurus, so they make their way to an Aztec ancient temple where there's a Quetzalcoatlus that made its nest there. I seriously don't understand where this temple comes from, but it does make a nice set piece. Unfortunately, again, we still need some story about the origins of this temple. Seriously, Universal, you need to give us a sequel. But anyway, they go to the nest, and Dr. Henry Loomis decides to get the DNA from a Quetzalcoatlus egg so that they don't have to go hand-to-hand in combat with a Quetzalcoatlus. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happens. The Quetzalcoatlus returns home and finds invaders in its territory, so it pushes them out, and Henry ends up nearly falling to his death, but luckily lands in a river, which I loved. Unfortunately, not everybody made it out of the Quetzalcoatlus encounter alive. And then we go back to the Delgados, who are also trudging through the jungle. And in the middle of the night, they settle down to rest. And Xavier, because I don't know why, on the boat, he refused to volunteer for a sleep shift. Well, here, he's actually volunteering, probably because it's a life or death situation. And at the same time, he also deeply cares for the Delgados, especially Teresa, his girlfriend. While Teresa and Isabel are sleeping, Ruben and Xavier get into a talk, and Xavier admits that he knows he's lazy, he knows he's a piece of crap, and at the same time, he's very lucky to have Teresa and doesn't know anything about why she's with him. Then Ruben chimes in with a line that I think everybody needs to know.
Other people may talk shit about us, but we don't have to do the job for them.
Anyway, the Delgados continue on their merry way, and, well, that's when Isabel meets Dolores, who is a baby Aquilops that she actually forms a bond with. And like I said earlier, she was kind of shut off because she was pretty nervous, but now she's actually helping contribute and providing ideas, and that's really cool. And I don't know, it's just super fun to see Dolores on screen. However, there are plenty of times where Dolores decides to leave the Delgados, and that's good, because I really don't see a way Dolores could survive any of the situations the Delgados get themselves into. Like how after a landslide causes Ruben to lose his walking stick and probably break his ankle even more, they notice a river as well as a raft house. So Teresa swims across the river and goes to the raft house where she encounters a Dilophosaurus, who is actually scared of the T-Rex right behind her that's sleeping. Again, I absolutely love the fact that the dinosaurs behave like dinosaurs in this movie, just normal, casual sleeping. Anyway, Teresa has to find a way to get the raft without waking up the T-Rex. Unfortunately, it's a self-inflating raft, which means that unless it's inflated and you bring it to the water, it will sink like a rock. And because of that, well, she has to inflate it on land. And when that happens, it's a big boom and the T-Rex wakes up. And then after the drink of water, it sees the Delgados and they have to make a run for it. Now, what I love is that Ruben's ankle is broken and, well, if they're on land, they wouldn't actually be able to outrun the T-Rex. But because they're in a river, even though the T-Rex can swim, he actually stands a chance of running away from the T-Rex. Well, swimming away from the T-Rex. Xavier, Teresa, and Ruben all manage to make it to safety by swimming between some rocks that the T-Rex can't fit inside. Unfortunately, Isabel is still underneath the raft and she's screaming for help from her dad, and this gets the T-Rex's attention and he bites into the raft, lifting it out of the water, and, well, you'd assume that would mean that Isabel would have died, but no, they're not going to kill a child in a Jurassic movie, no matter how realistic that would actually be. So Isabel manages to survive and swim to safety, and very surprisingly, the raft pops up on the other side of the rocks, and despite being bitten in half by the T-Rex, it's still intact. So what's going on? Anyway, the Delgados managed to use the raft to follow the geothermic pipes to the InGen facility. At the same time, the mission team also reaches the InGen facility, and they meet up with each other, and when that happens, Teresa confronts Martin Krebs. And the thing I don't really like about Teresa is that the entire movie, she was complaining about Martin Krebs, about how he just let her die and she wanted to get revenge on him. And that's exactly what happened, except Martin Krebs held a gun on literally everyone. He demanded to get the DNA samples from Zora, who was carrying the suitcase, which he then handcuffed to his arm. And then we get a scene where the gang is attacked by the Mutadons. Now, earlier in the movie, Xavier was taking a bit of a bathroom break, and right behind him, he actually hears the sound of a velociraptor about to attack him when it's attacked and killed by a Mutadon. If you don't know, Mutadons are essentially just mutant pteranodon velociraptor hybrids, which is very, very weird. So the Velociraptor doesn't kill Xavier, and the Mutadon just flies away with its prey. And then, well, Xavier calms down after the terror's over and finishes using the bathroom. But unfortunately, the Mutadons are back, and now they're attacking everybody. So once again, our teams are split up. The Delgados hide in a grocery store. Zora is trying to get the gun and possibly the suitcase from Martin, who is trying to use the gun to kill the Mutadon, but he's a terrible aim. And, well, eventually he manages to hijack a car and use it to escape. And while that's happening, Henry and Kincaid are exploring the InGen facility, and this is the perfect time for lore to be introduced about the mutants and other hybrids that could have been made on the InGen facility. But no. Instead, we just find out that there's a boat on the dock and that the helicopter is doing a flyover. So they grab some flares, and Henry uses a flare to signal the helicopter, which, despite thinking that there were no humans, circles back for the flare. And, well, Henry waits there for the helicopter to land, and when it does, it's inside the mouth of the D-Rex. Yep. So, unfortunately, by using the flare to get the pilots to land, Henry effectively killed them. Anyway, the Delgados, who once again are reunited with Dolores, end up being attacked by the Mutadons, and they stealthily make their way to a sewer drain where the Delgados crawl through the underground tunnels, at which point a Mutadon crawls in after them, causing Zora to use the gun that she got from Martin to go after the Mutadon. And then the Delgados try to escape the underground tunnel when they meet up with Duncan, but he tells them to go back in the tunnel and use them to navigate the island to get to the docks so that they can get to a boat. And Henry just admits that there's no helicopter coming. Then Zora manages to find the Delgados, at which point she shoots at them just so she can get the Mutadon right behind them, and she effectively kills it. Then they manage to make their way to the dock exit, but unfortunately the gate is closed and nobody can fit through the bars except for Isabel because she's small and a child. So Isabel squeezes through and goes to the gate controls right when the Distortus Rex shows up once again, and then, well, Martin Krebs shows up with his car and rams into the Distortus Rex, and that's only because the D-Rex is super big and colossal, and the D-Rex turns its attention to Martin and ends up eating him, with the exception of the hand that's cuffed to the suitcase. After Isabel opens the gates, Zora grabs the suitcase holding the DNA, and they run away from the Distortus Rex, only for the crane that's holding the boat to not be operational, and they need a distraction from the Distortus. And, well, Duncan decides to use the flares, and Alan Grant and Ian Malcolm style uses them to lure away the Distortus Rex. And unfortunately, it looks like this is going to be a heroic sacrifice. So, given the time, they manage to get the boat in the water and they go out to sea. And Zora is super sad because she's saying goodbye to her friend, and then there's a brand new flare. And surprisingly, this one doesn't actually lure out the Distortus Rex. Instead, they turn the boat around and manage to pick up Duncan, who survived his encounter with the D-Rex. D-Rex, which is very weird and definitely disappointing because, like I've been saying, this franchise could definitely use a selfless sacrifice. That's exactly what this was, but he still survived. Anyway, our 7 survivors, 8 if you count Dolores, use the boat to cross the ocean, at which point Zora and Henry get into a conversation about who they should give the DNA to. Clearly, Martin Krebs was the villain of this movie because he kind of just had this stay on mission, use the DNA for a secret purpose that no one in the world should know about. And, well, that means that Parkergenics, the corporation he's working for, might also be corrupt. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if Mr. Parker, the CEO, was actually the main villain of one of the future movies. But anyway, Zora decides that just like Henry wanted, they should open source the DNA so that they can use the DNA to get a cure for the heart disease that's going around the world. Sure, it means Zora misses out on her $10 million, but it also means that more people have access with cheaper means. And then, just like how the original park ended with the helicopter and some seagulls signaling a return to the normal world, this movie ends with the boat and some dolphins. And that is the end of the movie, and honestly, I thought it was really good. I especially loved the ending with Act 3. The way that the D-Rex killed off the main villain of this movie, while at the same time setting up a future villain. And then, of course, the fact that the D-Rex was left alive. The park movies did an amazing job of this, but the world movies, well, the Indominus was killed, the Indoraptor was killed, the Giganotosaurus, despite not really being a villain, was also killed. But the D-Rex and some of the Mutadons, they are still very much alive and set up for a potential sequel, which is better than the original ending where there was going to be a fight between the D-Rex and the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and the T-Rex was actually going to win and kill the D-Rex. But honestly, we definitely need a sequel to answer the questions that this movie gave us, like where on Earth did the mutants come from and why weren't they killed off? Well, I mean, they did answer that by saying each new species they create cost millions of dollars. They're not going to throw that away. Even if they decided that this island would become home to the worst of the worst species that they ever created, stuff that no one in the public should even know about, which is very weird. Also, who are Parkergenics? What is their deal? What happens when Dolores returns to the mainland? Will she die from the cold, or is the equator just a conspiracy from the government so they can get rid of dinosaurs? Why did the public lose interest after just 9 years of living with dinosaurs? But above all else, why was the Distortus Rex and Mutadons left alive? Could they somehow find their way to the mainland and set up a potential sequel? There's so much to go off of here. But yeah, honestly, in summary, this movie is really good. Beautiful scenery and cinematography. The CGI dinosaurs are simply amazing, even if the designs are a little bit weird. There's also the return of horror, which I absolutely loved, as well as a bit less action in this movie. And of course, the humor was simply awesome. But my personal favorite part has to be the fact that this is the start of a brand new era. I have no idea where this trilogy is going, but I do know I'm excited for it. So what are some of your thoughts about the potential sequel? And also, what are your thoughts on Rebirth? Make sure to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section. And if you really want to help support the channel, be sure to join my membership program, or you can just do the free option and subscribe. Make sure that above all else, you're staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.
I'm taking her home with me.
That may or may not be a terrible idea.